You've probably heard about Lexical, our new beautiful rich text editor, but the coolest part of our editor is not the editor itself. It's the way you can customize it. And it's probably the most customizable rich text editor which exists on planet Earth right now. So today I'm going to show you how to build your own custom lexical features step by step. And specifically, I'll show you how to build a custom embed feature, like YouTube embeds or Spotify embeds, any other embeds. And at the end of this tutorial, I'll be publishing that feature to Payload for anyone to use. First, let's start by creating a new Payload app. The npx create Payload app at beta. In this case, call it lexical embeds, blank template, use MongoDB. So the first thing I want to do is replace all these beta versions of our packages and pin them to the latest version to make sure that we are running the latest version. So replace all instances of beta with whatever the latest beta is for you. And then we need to install the lexical package. Now we already have rich text lexical installed, but to create your own custom features, you will be interfacing with the lexical API directly. So let's install lexical version 0.16.1 in this case. You'll have to make sure that the version of lexical you use here matches exactly the version of lexical we use. So you can look into our package JSON from @payload/rich text lexical, and you'll notice that we are using 0.16.1. So that's what we'll use here. And another thing we can install is add lexical/eslint plugin, which gives us some pretty helpful rules while we're writing our lexical feature. So now you can run pnpm to install all those new packages. And let's actually enable the lexical eslint rules we have just installed first. So in your eslint rc.cjs, within the extends property, you can add plugin : add lexical/recommended. And now you automatically have some pretty helpful lexical eslint rules installed. That's it. Now, the first thing we're going to do is start Payload and see if it works. Clean instance of Payload now. Let's add a rich text field to, let's just use the users collection because why not? Create a rich text field, add a payload, and there we go. We have a working rich text field. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to click on the plus button or the slash and have an option for creating YouTube embeds. So we would type /embed. It would give us an option to insert a YouTube embed node. It lets us select the video URL and all that. So we would have a feature in the end which we can add to this lexical editor. So in here you can provide your own features, and in here we would provide our custom embed feature, and that's it. So first of all, let's create a new folder for our embed feature. Let's just call it embed feature. Now, next thing we need to do is create the entry point of our features. So there's both a server feature and a client feature interface. And the way it works is each lexical feature is split up into both the server and the client. And the server feature only does stuff which makes sense to do on the server, like hooks or validation for nodes. And the client feature, which is really the biggest part of any feature, controls what the user interfacing with the editor will actually see. But the entry point is the server feature because this code runs on the server. So whatever we provide here will also be on the server. The convention is to use a feature.server.ts and a feature.client.ts. So we can start by creating a feature.server.ts first. And we don't need to worry about the client feature for now. And in order to create a feature, you can use our create server feature helper function, which makes creating features a lot easier by reducing a lot of the boilerplate you would have to write otherwise. So we can be like export const lexical server feature, equals create server feature, you can import it straight from plcms/rich text lexical. By the way, everything you import from here can only be used on the server, and everything you import from rich text lexical/client, all this should only be used on the client. So anyways, let's call our create server feature helper. It accepts an object, and the first thing we need to provide is a key. Every feature needs a unique key, and we can call it embed. And the actual feature then goes into the feature object, and that's it. That's like the most basic lexical feature you can create, and we can already add that to our editor features, just like this. And we got to call it, right? Now we also want the default features in our test editor, so let's make this a function which will provide us the default features. We can return them here and add our lexical server feature right there. All right. Now, for now, we don't really need to do anything on the server. I would start with the client first, because that's what you'll actually see. So simply create a feature.client.ts in here. Since this lives on the client, we need to mark this with the use client directive, just like this. And now we can create an export const, embed feature client, and use our create client feature helper. Same thing. Just got to import it from /client. We can call this, give it an object, and that's basically the most minimal client feature. And the way you connect it to the server is you just pass this embed feature client to the client feature prop on the server. And that way we keep the server feature as an entry point. By the way, we should have named it embed feature. That makes more sense. We'll name it here too. So this stays the entry point, and the server feature then renders the client feature, so to say, on the server. And that's how it's connected. Now, what do we need on the client? First thing are nodes. So nodes are probably the most important part of any lexical feature. In Slate, if you use that, you would call them elements and leaves. They're both the same in Lexical. All of them are nodes. And everything you see in the editor is a node. So one thing we can visualize nodes is by adding the tree view feature, which is exported from rich text lexical right here. Now let's reload the editor, and you will see this tree view, where you can see all the nodes, right? And as you can see here, this is a node, a paragraph node. The text itself is a node as well. The bold text is not a node; it's a prop on the text node. Now, if you add, a relationship, that is a node as well. You can see here, node key number 12 is a relationship, or a horizontal rule. That's a node too, right here, horizontal rule node. So every single thing you see here is a node. And there's different kinds of node. For example, this relationship node here, that's a decorator node, which basically means it accepts React components. Specifically, it's a decorator block node. So this will take up the entire horizontal space. You can put this next to a text. Now, a link contrary is not a decorator node. It's just an element node, which is pretty similar, with the difference that links, well, this specifically is not a React component. It's just HTML. The benefit of using an element node over a decorator node is that you can have children. Like this link node, as you can see in the tree view, has a text node as a children. This relationship node will not be able to have any children. The rendering is completely handled by React. So Lexical cannot render its own children in there. If you wanted it to have children, you would need to initialize a sub-editor, which is just annoying. Now, for our YouTube embed node, we don't need any children. We just want to be able to render a simple React component, which renders a YouTube embed React component into the editor. We don't need to worry about it having any sub-nodes or anything like that. So we will create a decorator block node. By the way, I strongly recommend you to look at the Lexical docs. They have a very helpful concepts section where they explain all the possible nodes and how Lexical works, and would be a good idea to look through that before creating your own feature. Anyways, so I would start by creating a new folder, call it nodes. We'll just have one, but it feels more organized. Create an index.tsx. And then in there, we would create the node, which by itself handles everything when it comes to how the node is rendered in the editor, how you can interact with it, all that kind of stuff. And the first thing I would do is define what's saved in the embed nodes data. So you can first create a type, call it embed node data. And really, what do we want to save in embed the URL? Like the URL controls what is displayed, and that's really all the data we need for now. We can add more cool stuff like being able to save a preview image of the embed, or making Payload automatically pull the current amount of likes that video has every time you request the editor data. We can do some cool stuff, but the most basic embed node would just have the URL. Now we'll just support YouTube for now. Eventually, when we want to support different kinds of platforms, we would need some kind of platform type. Maybe don't. We can just extract the platform from the URL. But yeah, this is the most basic type for now. But the node itself saves a bunch of other data, not just the URL we define here. So we would create a serialized embed node, which is what exactly is being saved into your database for this specific node. And we can use the spread helper, which is exported from Lexical. So let's import spread from Lexical. There it is. Auto suggest is broken sometimes. Export type, maybe that's why. And basically what spread does is it lets you define a base node. In this case, since we want to create a decorator node, we would define a serialized decorator node, or a serialized decorator block node specifically. Now this exported from @lexical/react. So let's install @lexical/react as well, because remember, decorator nodes render React component, so that's why they did not put it in the Lexical package, because that package is agnostic. Like you can use it on Svelte and Vue, but this is React specific. So now we can import it from here, and a serialized decorator block node has stuff like format, what else, type, version. I'll explain that later. But we also want to add our little URL thing. So all you need to do is give it an object, and in here you can define what gets added to the existing block node type. And we want to add a property, call it fields, which is the actual data. So basically, the actual data of our embed node will be saved under the fields property. And then we want to define a type for this node, which will be embed. And we want to define that this node has no children. So we give it the children prop, type does never. So now we have the type for serialized node. And now we can start by creating the actual node itself, which in Lexical is a class. So we would create an export class embed node, which extends from decorator block node. You can use decorator node. Decorator block node already implements some functions for us and makes it easier to create a block node. We can define that this node saves data, and there's a constructor. And this is all just a lot of boilerplate, like the constructor gets the data, format, and the key. We can import all that, calls the super method from the actual decorator block node. And in creating an embed node, you pass in the data, so the URL, and it saves the data in here. The first thing we need is a clone method. You can create a static clone, which accepts an embed node. And in here, we tell Lexical what should be returned if we wanted to clone an existing embed node. So in this case, we return a new embed node, and we pass it what we defined in our constructor, which is the data. So data equals node.data, the format, and the key. So now Lexical knows how to handle cloning a node. And that's how we're going to continue. We just tell Lexical how to handle specific operations on a node or how it behaves. Next thing we need is a static getType method, which returns a string. And the type of the node, which we define above here, is embed. So we return embed. And Lexical will call this method when we register this node, and Lexical loads it up to determine the type. And that is also what will be displayed in the preview here. Now, next thing we need is an import JSON method. Now, this is one of the most important ones because this tells Lexical how to create a new embed node based on the data it loads from the database. So its argument, it accepts the serialized node, so the type we just created, and it outputs the initialized embed node. And now we will do this later, so I'll just add a to-do here because we're going to create this node using a helper function, which we can define later. Now, probably even more important, we need add our decorate function. You see what it accepts? It gives you the lexical editor and the config. We don't really need those right now. And it returns a JSX element, which we got to import in React 19. So in here, we will give it the React component it should render. We haven't created that component yet, so we'll set it to do it here as well. And now we need an export JSON function, which works the exact opposite way than import JSON. That's how we control what is saved in the database. So we will return an object where we first call the super method from the decorator node, so super.export JSON. And what do we want to export? We want to export fields. So whatever we defined here, we need fields, which is this.data. We need the type, which is always embed, and we need the version, which we'll set to 1 for now. Versions you can use if you wanted to make breaking changes to the data you output. And then using the version, you can see what data format the currently saved node is using, and you can kind of create the migrations for your data based on this versioning. But we don't need that for now, so let's set it to 1. Now, instead of this underscore data, we should create a helper function, call it getData, which just returns the embed node data, and this returns this.getLatest.data, not just this.underscore data. And as you can see, the JS docs, this returns the latest node data and makes sure the data is not stale. So in here, we call getData instead. This good data. There we go. Now, one mistake, export JSON should return the serialized embed node, not the serialized decorator node. The next thing, we need a setData method. If you wanted to change the data which is saved on the node, which accepts a data argument of embed node data. And all it does is first it creates something called a writable. That's how you can modify whatever is saved on that node. So const writable equals this writable. This just returns an embed node, but a mutable version of it. And we can now call writable.data equals data. That's it. And then we need an export DOM. It's like this. And that basically controls how this node is serialized into HTML. We don't really need it for now, so I would just return an element and make it a div. Document.create element, type div. Another thing Lexical wants is a get text content method. So the Lexical knows what text is saved in that node. And I would just return this.getData.url. So the text content of our node is a URL. But really, these are not too important right now. So now we have two missing functions, import JSON and decorate. For import JSON, we wanted to create a helper function, which creates our embed node for us. So let's create that right now. We can call it export function $create embed node. Now that's important, this $. So this $ signalizes that it can only be called within Lexical. And that's because within this, we need to use a Lexical API and call it apply node replacement. And within this helper function, we initialize the actual embed node using the data we pass in here. People can decide to replace your embed node with their own if they wanted to. And this probably just makes sure that their replacement will be used instead of our embed node. And another useful helper function will be is embed node. So say you're working with the lexical editor state and you wanted to know if the current node you're working with is an embed node or a link node or whatever. You can use this helper function to, in a type-safe way, know if this is an embed node. So this function accepts a generic node, and the output of that will be an embed node if it is, in fact, one. We can just use return node instance of embed node. And now we can call our newly created helper function within import JSON. So simply create a new node, const new embed node equals create embed node, which needs the URL, which we can get from serialized node dot fields dot URL. And one thing we should give it is the node format from the serialized node, and then we can return it. So the last and most interesting part of our node is the decorate method. This will accept a React component. So let's create a new folder called components, which has an index.tsx. And in here, first I use client because this will live on the client. We're importing React, and we can create a new component export const embed component, which is a React functional component, no props yet, and it returns just a paragraph test. And now I would always lazy import our node first, so we can be like const embed component equals react.lazy. Then we can import from /components/index.tsx. And once the import is done, we want to return the named embed component exports. Since React.lazy only accepts default exports, we kind of need to convert it that way. Of course, we have to import React first. We do not need this. And now we can return this lazy loaded embed component within our decorate method. So here we return the rendered embed component, and that's it. Now, all we need to do is register this node. So currently Lexical does not know that this node exists. Where would it find it? And the way we do it is using our feature interface. So in our client feature, this has a nodes key. Very simple. An array which accepts the node. That's it. And we also need to register this node on the server as well. Works just a tiny bit differently. So the server also has a nodes key which accepts an array of objects. And in here we pass it to the node property. That's because you can do a bunch of other operations on that node, like node validations, node hooks, similar to payload field hooks, but for nodes. But we don't need those for now. And that's pretty much it. Now, I would love to show you this node. It should just render this test paragraphs into your editor. The problem is, how are we going to create a node? It's registered in Lexical, but there's no slash menu entry yet. There's no toolbar entry. There's nothing yet. So let's start by creating a slash menu entry. So the slash menu property is an object which accepts groups and dynamic groups. We don't need dynamic groups for now. Groups are fine. And that is just an array of slash menu groups. We are already exporting a slash menu group with items. And that's a function which accepts an array of items. So let's give it an array, and let's create our first slash menu item. The item, like many things in here, need a key. So let's call it embed. We need a list of keywords. So when you type slash and you type some text, the keywords are what it uses to match the text you type after this slash with the node it suggests to you, and just be embed or YouTube. And then the label, so what's actually displayed in the slash menu, would be embed. Now it just needs two more things. First, it needs an icon. So let's create a new React component, icons, index, and I'm just going to copy and paste it for now. I'll have this in the video description. Just a simple embed icon component. And yeah, we can import this one in here. Now it needs one more property, which is on select. This is what's actually called when you select the slash menu items. So this is where we need to create our node and insert it into the editor. And that's just an empty function for now. And let's add a little console log and start up our project and see if it works. So it's type slash, type embed, and there we go. You see our newly created embed node slash menu item. And now once we click on it, for now, all it will do, it's gonna output this console log, embed test. Now, how do we create a new embed node from our onSelect callback? Lexical has a thing called commands. Commands are basically functions, pieces of functionality which you can register within Lexical, and then they can be called anywhere within Lexical. So we would have to create a command which creates a new embed node and register it within Lexical, and then we would call that command in here or dispatch the command. One area where we can do that are plugins. Now, the name is kind of confusing. Plugins are not the same as features. I just call them plugins because that's what they were called in the Lexical playground. They're like showcase, Lexical editor. Basically, they're React components. They're React components which get added at the very top level of the Lexical editor, still beneath the providers. And you can use plugins to do a bunch of lexical operations like register commands or listeners or node transforms, which then interface with the editor in some way, or just have some permanently displayed React component. That's how the toolbar features work, or the inline toolbar feature. All they basically are lexical plugins. So let's set the plugins prop, which is just an array of objects where we determine the position of the plugin or component, which is just normal, nothing special going on here. And it requires a component. So let's create that component. We create a plugins folder, x.tsx, which needs the use client directive because this only lives on the client. Export const, embed plugin, which is of type plugin component, which is just react.fc with the correct props. And we don't really need to return any actual component right now. And we can pass in this embed plugin component into our feature right here. So in here, we need a use effect, which returns a merge register function. So merge register is a helper function from lexical/utils, which you can use to register multiple lexical commands at once. We will only need one for now, but we will need later in the future, which is why we're already going to use this function. It's exported from lexical/utils, which we have not installed yet. So let's just go into our package.json and install at lexical/utils version, same one as the others, npm install. And within that function, we can call editor.register command. Where are we going to get our lexical editor instance from? You're going to use const editor equals use lexical composer context. This hook gives you the current editor instance of where this plugin is registered. Now, the register command function first needs the actual command. Now, the actual command, since it can be used anywhere in Lexical, we need to create this command outside of the actual plugin, which is right here. And here we can define an export const. Let's call it, insert embed command, so a command which inserts the actual embed node into the editor, which is of type lexical command from lexical. This accepts all the props for this command, which would be URL, but for now, let's just leave it as undefined. We use create command, also exported from lexical, and now we need to give it a key. So let's just call it insert, well, same thing as our variable, insert embed command. So that will be the first argument of editor.register command. And the second argument of this command registration will be the function which is called when the command is dispatched. So function, still callback. The third argument would be the command priority. This command doesn't need any special priority or consideration as for that. So we just give it the command priority normal. And now this function is what actually matters. This will run and insert our embed node. Before we implement that, let's just handle dispatching this embed command. So remember, within our /menu on select, we want to dispatch this embed command. And then in here, we want to handle the creation of our node. So within our client feature, in the onSelect, we do have our editor available as an argument. So we can now use our editor to run editor.dispatch command on it. First argument, same for register command, will be the insert embed command, which we can just import like this. The second argument will be the arguments, which is nothing, undefined, remember? So this will be dispatched when we click on the actual /menu item. Then this will run, and now we can handle the actual insertion of our node. First, we create the node, const embed node, and remember the helper function to create embed nodes we made earlier. $create embed node. That's all we need. And here it needs the URL, which we are just going to set to something like this. It's not used yet. And then we call a helper function from lexical. It's called $insert node to nearest root, and we give it our newly created node. So first we create the node, a new instance of that class, and then we insert it into our editor using this helper function. And at the end, we want to return true, which signalizes to lexical that this command operation was successful. And that's about it. So let's run our project and see if that works. /embed and done. It creates our embed node. And as you can see here, in our tree view, this is the new embed node we created node keys for. We can drag it around. It's just like a proper node. And if we look at the API output, this is our embed node. And you can see in here the node format we defined here. So it has a fields property with embed node data, which is URL. So fields URL, HTTP, that's the thing we defined in our lexical command. It has a type embed. It has no children. It has a format and a version, which is defined in serialized decorator block node. And now all that's left to do is to create a proper embed React component. That's it.